Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. People who have legally killed someone. How has the experience affected you, and does it still to this day? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I paralyzed someone in a high school football scrimmage, and they later died, years later, from complications resulting from the paralysis. I became friends of the family, and they have emphasized over and over again that it was not my fault, but I still feel guilt, and it weighs on me. I had to make the decision to shut off my 10-year-old son's ventilator when he was dying from complications of his genetic neuromuscular disease. He was on hospice. I held his hand the whole time and felt his heart stop. This was in 2022. It haunts me every single day. I have nightmares and panic attacks. My brother was dying, and I deliberately OD'd him on Dilaudid. The hospice nurse pretty much left me set up to do it. He was in so much pain. I think about it a lot, and I do believe I did the right thing, but sometimes I look at his daughter and the guilt comes at me. I'm a physician and provided medical assistance in dying to a man with end-stage COPD. It is legal where I live, and he would get out of breath eating a sandwich. I don't think it changed me, but it was the first time as a doctor I went from trying to keep someone alive to giving them the medication to die. My dad died of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, but in the hospital, my mom couldn't tell them that it was okay to disconnect his life support, ventilator, dialysis, fluids, so many tubes. I had to. They removed the breathing tube, and the tough old bastard started breathing again on his own. It took about 3 hours before his body couldn't make it work. His pulse would get above 50 BPM, then drift into bradycardia, and then he'd bounce back, never going below 25 beats per minute. Then it dipped to 19, and it held there for about 30 seconds before finally going to the, like on TV. I know I didn't kill him, but I was the one who agreed to disconnect him from life support. He was going to die anyway, but having had a tiny hand in the process haunted me for a few years afterwards. It'll be 18 years ago this Halloween. My parents died on Halloween and Christmas Day, hooray. So I'm not shaken by it any longer, but those first couple of anniversaries, there was a guilty feeling that I knew was silly, but that still made me feel awful. Was the victim of a break-in when I was 20. Was over at my buddy's house for a few days. His parents had left for work, and the guy probably thought the house was empty. I was in the bathroom and heard a loud bang bang bang. Almost sounded like a hammer hitting a wall. Wasn't all too concerned until about 15 seconds later I hear my friend shouting and then something breaking. So I got out of the bathroom quick as hell, and that's when I heard the burglar saying, "Let's go in, I'm gonna stab you." I couldn't see anything from the end of the hall, but I knew something bad was happening, and time just felt slow, and I just knew I had to get my friend's shotgun from his closet. So I crossed the hall, grabbed the shotgun, and ran to the living area. And there's my buddy, pinning the guy against the wall, and in his hand is some large knife. So I racked the shotgun, thinking there was one in the chamber. Ends up, there was one, so it jams when I pump forward, and the guy stops and looks at me. I freak out and start to stumble backwards. The dude pushes my friend off and turns toward me. I came to my senses and racked the shotgun again, and the shell flies out, and the new one loads. I don't remember pulling the trigger. I think the adrenaline literally took my body over, just boom, and the whole room shook. My ears were ringing and everything felt so vivid. And the guy just collapsed. No scream, no theatrics. He just fell to the floor face down. My friend grabbed the knife from the ground and ran to the phone to call 911. I remember standing there just looking at him. I couldn't move. It felt like an hour. But as soon as my friend was assured the police were on the way, he came and got me to sit down. That was 18 years ago, and it still feels fresh. It was an emotional month or two afterwards. I wasn't charged with anything. Police were very understanding, and the family of the guy didn't press for any sweets. But I kept going back and forth on whether I did the right thing, but I've accepted the guy had a knife, I was scared, and in the end, both my friend and I survived. I'll let God decide if I was in the right. My father was diagnosed with cancer at 48. I sat by his side for 8 months and a few surgeries and chemo. I was the one tasked with power of attorney, and in the end, it was my call when he became comatose. It was one of, if not the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, even though my childhood wasn't great, and we never really got a lot of quality time together. I stepped up to that out of love and respect to life. I'm a nurse, so my family was depending on me at the end of our mom was at home, dying of cancer. They would ask about every little sound, why her body was doing certain things, etc. Though she'd been unconscious for days, I continued to give her pain meds. Once she started with the death rattle, they were certain she was choking and begged me to suction her. I tried to explain, but they'd have none of it. So reluctantly, I began to gently clear her throat. At that point, she took her last breath. I felt so guilty that I'd taken the air away from her and caused her to die too soon. It didn't help that I also had to announce her time of death. It's been 26 years, and I still have not cried over her dying. I think of her as being on one of those cruises she loved to take. She and I had a rocky relationship, and there's many things left unresolved. A female friend of mine had been in a relationship with a guy whose drug habit made him pretty volatile for a few years. He became infamous for his fits of rage and even hit her on more than one occasion. When she finally left him, I wanted to help her moving out of the shared home. When we got there, he was obviously high as a kite and almost immediately accused me of having an affair with her and being the reason she broke up with him. Honestly, I do not even remember what my answer was, but things escalated immediately, and he pulled out a knife and lunged at me. My dumbest mistake that day was to enter the flat far enough that he managed to position himself between me and the front door so I could not just get the hell out of there. I tried to get the knife out of his hands and ended up with some pretty deep cuts, but somehow managed to avoid getting stabbed and finally got him into a headlock and wrestled him to the ground. I started choking him out while keeping the arm holding the knife away from me with the other hand. After it felt like ages, he stopped struggling and got limp. I immediately let go of him and got my friend to call the police and an ambulance. She had been frozen in place and turned completely pale during the whole ordeal. Her ex-boyfriend kept completely unresponsive until the emergency services arrived. I had to go to the hospital myself, as my cuts required me to get stitched up. While I was still in the hospital, the policeman who had been at the scene after arriving along with the ambulance informed me that her ex-boyfriend had been pronounced dead. I was under investigation for manslaughter for a brief period of time, but it was quickly ruled as self-defense. Honestly, I don't really know how to put into words how I feel about what happened that day. I'm sad about losing my friendship to her after this event, as she said seeing me always reminded her of this incident, and she couldn't bear it. I feel stupid for letting it even come so far. I should have known better than to enter the flat or even interact with him in his state, as I had known about his outbursts for years. I never was a fan of people doing heavy drugs, but since that incident, I got extremely uncomfortable around people who were obviously high on something, which in my hometown is a surprisingly common sight, unfortunately. And, if that makes any sense, somehow I feel bad for not feeling bad about what I did. To this day, I'm convinced he really tried to kill me that day, and I only did what I had to do. My mom was in home hospice at her home, and I was her primary caregiver. Stage 4 head and neck cancer. Obviously, the cancer really killed her, but I gave her the morphine that allowed her to let go and slip away from our mortal plane. Standard dose, nothing crazy. It was 6 years ago, and I remember every moment of it as I watched her breathing slow and then nothing, and she was gone. It was June 10, 2019 at 4:10 a.m., and my dad and brother were fast asleep. I had to wake them up and break the news. For the year after, antidepressants helped, and therapy was invaluable. I'll never forget it, and I have no guilt as she was pretty much begging to die the last couple of days she was with us. That was the hardest part. The death itself while heartbreaking, was more of a moment of relief for all of us. I think of my mom every day and miss her like crazy. Going through that experience fundamentally changed my life view.
Everyone is going to feel how they're going to feel, and no one should make you feel any worse or better necessarily about the situation. You have to process it yourself, and other people deal with extreme trauma like that in different ways. But if it ever does come to you, just trust that what you did was in the best interest of the person, and it's for the best and for a reason, and find peace.
I was pretty close with my cousin until I was 14. We drifted apart, but still saw each other on occasion. Lived in the same neighborhood when I was 16. Important for later, I always carried a knife when I went out. I'm not going to get into why, but it's important to remember. Anyway, she started doing drugs because of her shitty sister. She went down a pretty bad path. It hurt to watch, and it hurt more when she begged me for money. I tried to get her help, but I was only a kid. Her grandparents did, but it wasn't enough. One night, me and my sister were hanging out in a parking lot. She got a phone call and said that we have to go pick up my cousin. We drove to some house, I still don't know whose, and my sister went inside while I stayed in the car. When she came back with my cousin, I could tell my cousin was out of it. My sister decided to take my cousin to her place, and it was honestly the worst ride of my life. Just seeing how much this person, who I was so close with for so long, had deteriorated was awful. We laid my cousin down on the couch. She seemingly was going to go to sleep, and my sister went to shower. I went outside on the porch and just let myself get consumed in my thoughts. I heard the door open, but didn't turn around. My cousin, who had found my sister's baseball bat, struck me on the head. I fell into the grass and my adrenaline kicked in. We fought, but it wasn't like in movies. It wasn't cool. I wasn't a badass. I didn't shrug off her hits. It was gross and muddy. My face was hot. I had tears streaming down my face from the pain, and honestly, she probably should have killed me there. She played a lot of sports. I did not. She used to work out every day and do gymnastics. I did not. She was physically significantly stronger than me. But I had a knife. That's the only reason I lived and she didn't. I had a knife, and she didn't know that I had a knife. And even if she did, she was too coked up to use that information. My sister came out and found us and rushed us to the hospital, but my cousin didn't pull through. I had to get stitches, and I still have a few scars from it. In case it wasn't obvious, yes, it still me up. I killed my childhood best friend, and it could have easily been me who died instead. 15 years ago, I shot and killed a 52-year-old father of 3 in self-defense. Long story short, I accidentally disrespected a funeral procession and 200 plus bikers by passing them in the right lane. They were going below the speed limit, and I just slowly passed them on a battered Honda Rebel from the early 90s. Several bikes turned out of the procession and almost ran me off the road, so I turned into a bank's parking lot, thinking they would leave me alone, but they followed me. I ended up with 6 guys surrounding me, and when one grabbed me and threatened my life, I fought back. Smashed my helmeted head into the first guy's face, but had 2 more jump me and start battering. I pulled my handgun and fired only 1 shot. That was all it took. He went down like a puppet with cut strings. Just one moment he's swinging his helmet at me, and the next he's dead. Lost my phone in the struggle, but bank security guard called the cops. Police, ambulance, handcuffs, interrogation rooms, etc. followed for hours afterwards. Ended up not being charged. Everything I did was judged self-defense. But I'll regret doing that for the rest of my life. With hindsight, I now know that I could have won the fight. I was 20 years younger than any of them, wearing a full face helmet and gear with hard plastic plates on the chest, back, and arms. Even my gloves had plastic armor on them. They had jeans and leather vests. It's weird. I know that given the same situation, I'd make the same decision each time, but I still regret doing it. I felt like a simple observer reading these until I realized I have a story as well. Although not nearly as heavy as those mentioned above, I was my grandmother's caretaker while she was on hospice. I administered all her medication, including the morphine that ultimately ended her suffering. It's not a traumatic memory for me, really. In a way, I was glad she was finally at peace. She was a miserable woman with no friends, and was very open about not loving her family. What hurts more is the image of my father burying his mother's ashes alone in her yard, the only thing in her life she truly loved. I wish he didn't have to do that alone, and I wish they had a happy relationship. I did my job as a soldier. It made me hate humanity. We're an awful species. In an abstract way, I hope we wipe ourselves out. In a personal way, though, I am a firearm owner. I loathe shooting. I bought a varmint rifle to take care of a rat problem and realized I couldn't do it. I'll never harm another animal. I try to be as good a person as I can be to the people I love. I don't regret what I did, but I deeply regret that I was put into that position. Those people were only doing what I would have done in their circumstances. I shot a home invader 10 years ago, protecting my girlfriend and I, who were living on our own not long after high school. I hit him in the chest after he broke and climbed in through a window and came into our bedroom. I don't relish it. He had a family and kids, but I would make the same decision again, as who knows what would have happened had I not. It bothered me a lot more years ago, but I've long since come to terms with it. I had a hard time feeling comfortable in my own home again for a while, but it almost feels like it happened to a different person now. The last time it affected me was a few years after I was working and someone broke glass the next aisle over, which really took me back. I was on the highway in the right lane. The car in front of me changed lanes, and before I knew it, I was on top of a scooter that should not have been on the highway. He rolled up my hood and onto my windshield, then fell back onto the highway as I hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder. The cops drew my blood to see if I had been drinking. My phone and car were seized for the investigation, which took the longest 10 months of my life. I found out they'd concluded the investigation when I got a voicemail to come pick up my phone at the police station, and a couple of weeks later, a call to arrange for my car to be picked up. While I was at my car waiting for the tow truck, the investigator called me, telling me I was being cited for careless driving. My insurance company settled with the family for about $600,000. I had increased our umbrella policy limit about a week before the accident. It's been 10 years. I mostly don't think about it anymore, unless something brings it to mind. But the anniversary was in May, and it was a very rough day. I still don't drive in that lane on that section of the highway. About 5 years ago, my friend's daughter's brother was killed on his motorcycle when he hit a truck that made a turn in front of him. About a year later, I found out that the truck was driven by the father of another one of her friends. I wanted to reach out to him, but the last thing I wanted to do was reopen the wound if he was healing. Damn, I needed your comment. I lost my dad to cancer 4 years ago, and it still haunts me that I pulled the plug on him. I've tried really hard to accept that I did the right thing by bringing him home, letting him pass being around the family instead of alone in a hospital, but it still really bothers me. I can't really talk to any of my siblings about it. They're mostly self-centered POSs, so I've just kinda kept it bottled up and have dealt with it as best I can. He was my best friend and we talked every day. So thankful for my wife helping get through it, but it's left a massive hole in me as a person. 28 years ago, wifey, my baby girl, and I were home asleep. It was about 0200. We were awakened by a loud crash and our Sheltie having a heart attack. I heard someone yell at Missy, then she yelped. A big old guy was standing at the end of the hallway. He took a couple of steps and I told him to stop, get on the floor and put his hands behind his head or I'd fire. He stopped for a couple of seconds, then took another couple of steps. I repeated myself again. He stopped, then took a couple more steps. This time I said if he took another step, I was going to put a .45 caliber slug center mass. He took another step, and I fired. Does it still affect me? Once everyone was done, I laid down and took a nap. I was protecting my wife and my baby girl. I didn't know what he was on. The only thing not in my system was Tylenol, and I wasn't going to take any chances. Mom was sick with a degenerative neurological disorder. She woke up one day and suddenly collapsed. I performed CPR till paramedics arrived. They managed to get some sort of pulse. When she was in the hospital, she crashed 2 more times and within 6 hours. I checked my phone record from the time I called an ambulance to the time we made it to the hospital. She was without oxygen and a heartbeat for at least 25 minutes, plus the other times it happened in the hospital. At that time, she was only with us because of machines working to keep blood flowing. I told Dad that we were looking at a negative outcome due to the lack of oxygen. He had me make the call to the ICU doctor to discontinue care. I had to sign paperwork, and a few other physicians had to also be in agreement. It took 10 minutes for the monitor to confirm. Thankfully, it was remotely monitored by a nurse, so we didn't have to hear that sound or know when it was over. So, I am directly responsible for that call, and I still question my decision, even though it was a no-win scenario. If the afterlife is something, I hope I'm not punished for it. Used to work in law enforcement. Had a job come in about a male smashing the rental property up he was living in with an axe. Me and my partner drive code to the job as a weapon is involved and he is actively destroying property. We arrived at the address, and I can see in the distance there is a small fire underneath the house. The house was a high-set one, raised up on stilts, so the floor there is still about 8 to 10 feet from the ground to the floor of the house. I could see the male under the house run from where the fire was to away from the house. We're just about at the front driveway now, and based on his actions, it looks like he was ready to run away. I jump out of the car ready to run after him, as I thought he was trying to run away. He stops and picks something up, which I didn't quite catch with a fence and the bonnet of a police car in the way of my vision. He runs from where he picked that item up to the driveway and keeps running down the driveway, whereby he was about 15 to 20 feet in front of me, and I could see it was a machete in his hand. He raised the machete at me to swing it at my direction and my neck. I let 3 rounds out of my gun at him, with 2 hitting him. He fell to the ground and I had to backstep to avoid getting hit by the machete. He tried getting back up with the machete, but fell to the ground. I tried CPR on him a moment later, but there was no response. I think from getting out of the car and shots fired was about 3 to 5 seconds. I've never legally killed anyone. Even so, I cannot help but feel guilt for a series of events that transpired in my late teens. To this day, I still think about them on a weekly basis. My best friend in high school, we'll call him John, was always a troubled person. He was always working an angle. As one teacher put it, he always seemed to find a blind spot. Above all else, he was fun, and his numerous antics always garnered more laughs than looks of concern. As we aged, his behavior became more erratic, less predictable, and more mean-spirited. What had started as more childish tricks and victimless vandalism turned into something darker. When his parents eventually got him help, the doctors concluded he had begun to show symptoms of bipolar disorder. Around the same time, John found the love of his in the form of heroin, which I imagine was some form of self-medication. I cannot imagine being keenly aware of losing your mental faculties in the manner he did. If I were in the same position, I could hardly imagine myself doing something different. As he spiraled deeper into mania and addiction, mean-spirited turned into violent. A playful disregard for the law turned into criminal behavior. But I loved John. He was like a brother to me. We grew up together and he lived across the street. I could hardly turn back on him. As things escalated, I had the distinct feeling he was going to hurt someone. The things he would ramble on about, even when he was sober, insinuated a desire to do so. However, I don't know who to tell. My mother would have never let me see him again, and his parents were unable or unwilling to discern his manic ramblings from the true intentions. So I told no one and simply listened, as it was all I could do. He killed a convenience store clerk in an armed robbery over something like $200. He was sentenced to life in prison and is eligible for parole in about 8 years. I think every day about how if I had just told the right people, I could have possibly spared 2 lives. To say that it haunts me is an understatement. So, no, I haven't legally killed anyone, but in some sense I feel responsible for 2 lives. 1 departed and 1 condemned. I still see John through glass, that is, at least once a year, and I send him books whenever I get the chance. While I cannot forgive what he put that clerk's family through, I still have to hope there is some form of redemption for him.